North Carolina Republicans have proposed new congressional maps ahead of the 2024 elections that could potentially knock off 4 Democratic incumbents next year. Now, we're going to talk about how Republicans are able to get something like this implemented, what the political implications are of this map, and we're going to compare this map to the current congressional map of North Carolina. So we're going to get to all of that in just a second, but first, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing down below and liking this video if you enjoy. So North Carolina Republicans have been on the offensive ever since they got their supermajority. There was a Democratic rep in the Charlotte area that switched from Democrat to Republican, which gave Republicans a supermajority in both the state house and the state senate. And since then, they've been passing a number of important pieces of conservative legislation. And this would probably be the most impactful for the North Carolina Republicans. Now, these maps aren't only limited to the congressional level. If we scroll down a bit, the North Carolina Republicans have also proposed new maps for the state house and the state senate, which would basically ensure their supermajority into the future. Now, again, this only was really possible because you had a Democrat switch parties. Otherwise, the Republicans would not have been able to get this done. But there's also another reason why North Carolina Republicans are able to do this, and that's because they won control of the state Supreme Court in last year's election. Now, previously, North Carolina had cycled through a number of congressional maps over the past decade. I think there were at least 4, all of which had been struck down and redrawn, with accusations of gerrymandering and whatnot. But now that Republicans control the Supreme Court of North Carolina, it's very unlikely that they're going to strike down any maps that the Republicans put forward. And the Supreme Court has been very wishy-washy when it comes to the issue of gerrymandering. In some cases, siding with the legislatures that gerrymander their states, and in other cases, not. It really depends on the VRA and factors like that. But the North Carolina Supreme Court last year struck down the proposed district maps and actually drew up the current congressional map that we have here. Now, this basically gives Democrats the advantage in 7 seats, and the Republicans have the advantage in the other 7. So that basically puts the North Carolina congressional delegation at a tie. Now, if we take a look at this map, there's one real competitive district. That's North Carolina's 13th. That went to President Joe Biden by around 1.7%. And if we take a look at the 2022 midterms, it went to Democrats by around 4 points with Wiley Nichols. So there really only was one competitive district. The rest of the districts were either safe red or safe blue. And some have argued that this map here is a Democratic gerrymander because you're cracking major population centers. You've cracked Charlotte into 2 districts. You've cracked Raleigh into 2 districts. And while it does give an even number of representatives to Democrats and Republicans, you do sort of have to gerrymander the state to get it that way. Now, North Carolina Republicans have put forward a new congressional map, not only to increase their influence in the state by putting more representatives on the congressional level that are their party, but also to combat gerrymandering in Democratic states. The 2022 midterms was a massive disappointment for Republicans, but one of the reasons why Republicans did so poorly, among others, was the fact that Democrats were able to successfully gerrymander a number of their states. New Jersey, for instance, was a Democratic gerrymander. The state of New Mexico was a Democratic gerrymander. Nevada, Illinois. So there's a number of states where Democrats from the get-go had an advantage. Now, Republicans also engage in gerrymandering. Obviously, Florida was probably one of the bigger examples in 2022, though this Florida map is actually very compact and neat compared to some of the other gerrymanders that the Democrats have put forward, like Illinois, for example. But nonetheless, both parties engage in this practice. Now, in the state of North Carolina, like I mentioned, there's 7 Democratic seats, 7 Republican seats. And with the new map being proposed, it's very unlikely that it's going to be struck down by the Republican Supreme Court. Again, Republicans now control the North Carolina Supreme Court 5-2. It was previously 4-3 Democrat. And that's why the previous proposal, which would have also been a heavily Republican favored map, which I think only gave Democrats 3 or 4 seats. That's why that was struck down. It's because the Democrats basically voted along party lines to strike that map down. But now we're going to look at the 757 proposal, which is here on Dave's redistricting. And this gives Democrats the advantage in just 4 congressional districts out of 14. So the first district is really the only district that's somewhat competitive. We can actually put up the county lines as well. This area right here in the northern part of the state is the Black Belt, which votes Democratic. It's also a more rural part of the state. We could pull up the 2020 election, for example, to kind of illustrate that. This area has a number of Democratic counties in the northern part and then sort of stretches down into more Republican territory in the southern part of the district. So, this is a district that only voted for Joe Biden by just 1.7%. You've got another Democratic district that's safety. It goes 66-31 for the Democrats. Another district, 72-26, that's District 4. And then District 12 is basically all the Charlotte area going for Democrats, 74-24. So this packs all the Democrats in the Raleigh and Charlotte area. It cracks Greensboro, which under the current maps has its own Democratic representative in District 6. So obviously, if that map were to go, that Democratic incumbent would lose re-election. You've also got the city of Fayetteville cracked, although I think in the current map, Fayetteville has a Republican representative just because it's also cracked under the current maps. But Charlotte is now compact under the Republican proposal. In the current maps, it's cracked. Raleigh's also cracked as well. So these maps basically pack the urban centers together and sort of stretch thin the rural areas just so that you have a massive Republican majority. Again, in a red wave environment where District 1 goes red, you would see an 11-3 congressional delegation in North Carolina for Republicans. Now, the interesting thing about these districts, since they're basically stretched all over the state, they're stretching into urban centers, there's not a single one of these districts that a Republican gets over 60% of the vote in, at least according to the 2020 elections. The reddest district on this map is the 13th congressional district, which gives Republicans 57.6% of the vote. So all of these districts are technically safe Republican, but they're only going Republican by low double digits. So in theory, in the future, it's possible that perhaps maybe one of these closer districts could end up flipping for Democrats. But really, Republicans basically secure their future in the state for the next 10 years, at least on the federal level with these maps. And again, North Carolina Republicans are doing this to combat Democratic gerrymandering in other states. Now, Republicans wanted to gerrymander more states, Ohio, a number of others, but they were struck down by their respective state Supreme Courts. But in North Carolina, it's very unlikely that this map is going to be struck down. And this could potentially be what saves the Republican majority in the House. Again, Republicans could potentially gain 4 seats if this map is implemented. And as of right now, it looks like based on the congressional maps that we have alone, Republicans could very well lose the House of Representatives. Again, they have such a narrow majority, and we're going to see at least one other blue district added in Alabama. That's from the VRA case earlier this year, and potentially other states depending on other court outcomes. So Republicans are really on defense here, trying to do everything they can to protect their House majority in the 2024 elections. And, depending on who wins the presidency and how well Republicans do in the popular vote could determine how and if Republicans are able to hold on to the House in 2024. Now, at this point in time, I think the Democrats are favored in the House of Representatives. I think Republicans are slightly favored in the Senate, just based on the map. Again, if you did have, for instance, the Illinois map struck down, possibly New Mexico, Nevada, then you could perhaps have an instance where Republicans have a pretty even chance at holding the House. But I think they're certainly on defense, especially given the fact that a lot of the districts they flipped, they won by less than a point or so. So Republicans are certainly on defense when it comes to the House of Representatives. North Carolina Republicans are trying to fix that, and they really are one of the most ruthless and effective Republican parties in the entire country. I mean, North Carolina is a state that only voted for Donald Trump by 1.3%, and yet we could potentially see a congressional map that has Republicans up 11-3. So it's incredibly impressive how effective the North Carolina GOP is, especially given how close their state has become over the last decade or so. And again, in the 2022 midterms, they did underperform in the Senate race there, but they did very well down ballot. Ted Budd only won by 3 points, but these North Carolina Supreme Court justices won their elections by 4 and 5 points. So they won the races that really mattered. Elections certainly have very large consequences in some cases. The North Carolina GOP certainly isn't messing around. And if this map ends up being the congressional map for North Carolina in 2024, Republicans are already guaranteed 3 pickups, potentially even 4, depending on how the 1st congressional district ends up voting. And the 1st congressional district, this black belt area in the northern part of North Carolina, has been trending red over the past couple of cycles. So it wouldn't be surprising for a Republican to potentially pick up the seat, provided you ran a strong candidate. But looking ahead at 2024, I still think Republicans are at a disadvantage when it comes to the House. Certainly an effort like this will help Republicans hold the House, at least gain 3 seats so they can afford to lose a couple more seats and still keep their current majority. But again, given the current makeup of the congressional maps, I still think Republicans are just at a disadvantage. There were a lot of races that they needed to win in 2022 to sort of pad the majority. New Mexico's 2nd, Michigan's 3rd, Pennsylvania's 8th, Pennsylvania's 7th. There's a number of swing districts that, had they gone Republican, would have had incumbents, and those incumbents would have had the incumbency advantage likely, and Republicans could have held on to those seats. But now, of course, in 2024, you're going to have Republican challengers fighting these Democratic incumbents, and they're very likely going to lose, especially given the fact that at this point in time, it looks like Joe Biden is on track to win re-election. So we'll see if this map holds up. Again, Republicans in North Carolina are optimistic. Since they had just won the Supreme Court, the governor of North Carolina actually has no say in the congressional maps process. That's mainly because before Roy Cooper assumed office, they'd done a number of changes like that to increase the power of the legislature to provide a larger check on the governor. And this is one instance where the legislature essentially has total power. So anyway, that's it for today's video. Please leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification so you don't miss any more videos I put out. As always, again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.